Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Banaz Mansouri. I'm a senior attorney with the Unemployment Law Project. The Unemployment Law Project has been around since 1984. We're the only freestanding legal aid organization in the country solely dedicated to unemployment. The Unemployment Law Project provides free advice and counsel and free representation to people in Washington state who have been denied unemployment benefits or whose award of benefits is being challenged. Before we move into our weekly webinar, I'd like to draw your attention to our annual fundraising event, traditionally known as Brew Review. This year, our event is moving online, or as we like to say, on Vine. On October 8th from 6 to 7 p.m., we will be hosting our Brew Review on Vine, and this year we will be offering beer and wine delivery options. I will drop the link to our website to the events page in the chat box momentarily. Please take a look. We would love for you to sign up as a participant and join us on this inaugural event online on Vine. We're here today with our weekly webinar, which occurs every Monday at noon. The purpose of today's webinar is to share the latest news and updates on unemployment benefits, to provide information about a recently filed lawsuit, and to answer your questions. We will share some commonly asked questions, and then I will be answering the questions that you drop into the Q&A chat box. I'd like to introduce our speakers today. From the Unemployment Law Project, Executive Director John Tierpak and Staff Attorney and Policy Director Ann Paxton. I will now turn it over to John to get us started.
Good afternoon. I would like to give an update on the writ of mandamus filing in the Washington State Supreme Court. In early June, the Sheridan law firm filed a writ of mandamus, a petition for a writ of mandamus that would require Employment Security to make prompt payments, as they have not been following their mandated duty. The case has been going since June. There have been declarations filed on both sides and briefing and argument filed on both sides. We recently found out that the court, because there is such a conflict in the factual findings from both sides, is sending it back to Superior Court in Thurston County. And so the court in Thurston County will be doing fact-finding on the matter. Now, at the same time, there was a court case filed by Northwest Justice Project. And the issues in the Northwest Justice Project case involving due process and other procedural violations was filed a few months ago in Thurston County Superior Court and has been in the discovery process. And it's been decided that the cases should be joined, that it would be best, since the issues are so similar because of the fact-finding and discovery happening. So that is the latest update on it. We don't expect a ruling on the case anytime soon, unfortunately, but the Supreme Court found the issues relevant and compelling enough to proceed with the case, and we will give future updates on it. But right now, we are moving ahead with factual findings in Thurston County's Superior Court.
Thank you, John. So thanks everyone for tuning in for our weekly webinar. I want to just, since John gave an update on the Sheridan lawsuit, I want to just stress that it is significant that the court has not dismissed the case, has not sent it off to where it will never be resolved. We're expecting it to move forward. So that is at least one positive thing about what's happening with that litigation. So as always, there's quite a bit of news this week, and I wanted to start with one of the major issues for on everyone's plate right now, which is the Lost Wages Assistance Program. I would say this is the #1 area of question since the $600 a week PUC was ended at the end of July, and everyone has been waiting to see if there would be a substitute. And of course there is. It's not at the same level as PUC, but the Lost Wages Assistance Program is in place now, and it has been taking applications up until yesterday for weeks ending August 1, 8, 15, 22, and 29, as well as September 5th. So there are 6 weeks that Washington has applied for and been approved for in terms of the money, which is coming from FEMA. So it's not money that has been locked down through Congress the way the PUC money was locked down. However, it has been, FEMA has agreed to pay at least this much. So there won't be any more continuation after the 6 weeks, however. So that's the limit right now. If you're eligible for claims for unemployment benefits during any of those 6 weeks, if you're approved, you will receive the extra $300 retroactively for those weeks. And I mentioned the deadline is passed for certifying claims, but today was the day they were supposed to start processing payments. So if anyone has received a payment, please notify us by jotting a note in the chat room, just so we can find out if things are actually happening. But that today was when things are supposed to start. You should get a notice if you're approved for lost wages assistance. You should get a notice in your e-services account. The amount will first be added to your weekly benefit amount, and then later to your benefits paid column. And so it should show $300 or $270 if you chose to have taxes withheld from your weekly benefit. Somewhat strangely, if you are not eligible, the lost wage assistance amount might still be added to your weekly benefit amount column and then subtracted again. No explanation for that, but just in case you think you're unique, this could be happening to a lot of people. Also, another anomaly, you may receive all 6 weeks at once, or you might get paid several weeks first and then more later, or you might get 1 week at a time. So no promises about the flow there. They are expecting the money to get out. And the eligibility questions should have been required, but not if you were receiving PUA. So you should be automatically eligible for that. If you have been receiving PUA, there might be an issue if that isn't what's happening to you. So some warnings, as I mentioned, the Lost Wages Assistance Program has a limited budget. FEMA has already said how much they're going to give. And what ESD is saying is if a claim is pending due to an issue being investigated, we must first resolve those issues and pay you regular UI benefits for those weeks. And then you'll get the lost wages assistance extra funds if those funds are still available. So this is the kind of worrisome element that's hanging over the whole lost wages assistance program, which is that the money may not be available if your claim is pending for too long. Technically, FEMA has approved the amount that Washington requested to pay claimants in this situation, all the 6 weeks. And technically, it is allowing the states plenty of time to resolve any lingering questions. Unfortunately, claimants whose claims are still pending when the program ends won't get the money later. So I just wanted to mention that now because it's possible that some people may be get a very unexpected surprise in that event. So we'll have to see how steadily the funds are actually distributed. Just as a point of interest, the last report on claims levels, there had been a slight increase the week that the Lost Wages Assistance Program started to be taking applications. Total claims are now up for all benefit categories by 6.6%. Initial claims are still 242% over a year ago, the initial claims from a year ago. And the top industry sectors continue to be the ones that are being hit hardest in terms of initial claims by their workers. Accommodation and food service, construction, educational services, that's kind of dropped back now because those claims have already been filed, the initial claims. Healthcare and social assistance and retail trade. And the occupations that have stopped rising in claim numbers but are still the highest are food preparation and serving, construction, management, transportation and material moving, and office and administrative support occupations. There's a lot in flux. However, just opening up my computer this afternoon, there was a note saying that Boeing announced 530 layoffs, permanent layoffs, November 20th. So that is the latest in a series of layoffs. We're kind of seeing a steady stream of those happening, and how they will all add up, we'll have to wait and see. One program that has been there's been a lot of take up on this program at ESD, and it's a really worthwhile a benefit that is available to employers and by extension to the employees, and that is the shared work program. So it's possible that people's employers are not familiar with this, and I wanted to mention it because it's a very, it's an extensive benefit. It's paid for already. It's paid for by the federal government. So if your employer decides to use it, here is what it would mean. It would allow your employer to share jobs between one or more people by reducing your hours. So they could reduce your hours up to 50%. And you would get, you would work those 50% of hours, and then you would get paid a portion of the lost wages in the form of unemployment benefits. So it's only for employees who are both permanent and it can be for, they have to be permanent, and if you're paid hourly or if you're on salary, your wages can be determined in hourly increments. The employer, if the employer is providing health insurance, they must continue doing that. It can last up to 1 year, and there is a maximum benefit payable amount that depends on your job history. No job search is required. You must be available for all work offered by your regular employer. This is important to mention because if your employer says, hey, we want you to come back to work full-time, you can't say, hey, I'd rather continue half-time, because you technically still need to remain available for full-time work. You might be eligible for benefit extensions too. So it could go on for several weeks, the 13 weeks under the pandemic emergency unemployment extension, and beyond that, there's the extended benefits that are part of the regular program that the federal government will cover. Half of it. You may run out of benefits more quickly if you work fewer hours. But if you want to get more information about that, see the website esd.wa.gov to get the details about what your estimated benefit would be if you're working half-time. They give you the breakdown if your normal hours are 40 hours all the way down to 10 hours or less. But it is a way for employers to get through this very kind of shaky period and still maintain benefits, some benefits for their employees, and continue to at least reimburse them for part of the work that they're missing out on. Something to tell your employer about if they may not know about it. The big scandal for this year, of course, was the fraud that was perpetrated against the Employment Security Department, not only in Washington State, but in about more than 30 other states. And this was an extremely sophisticated fraud. Washington State initially lost at least $576 million to the fraud schemes. About $346 million of that was recouped, so it was not a permanent loss. However, that's a severe hit to Washington's program. I believe it was mostly federal money. However, it was definitely set the state back. There have been concerns, and there was a story in the Seattle Times over the weekend that ESD had actually turned off some of its fraud controls in the claims systems, and there was a lot of blame being exchanged about whose fault this was. There had apparently been a so-called discovery process to check for fraud risk, and that this was somehow put temporarily on hold. The commissioner denied that was what had happened. She blamed the sophistication of the fraud scheme based on prior stolen Social Security numbers and unemployment claims that made the false claims hard to distinguish from legitimate ones. And another factor was emergency federal directives that instructed the states to get benefits to Americans quickly but also it did eliminate some of the basic fraud safeguards. So that is what their belief was the problem. There was also the waiver of the waiting week, which is still in place. That is covered by the federal government, but when it was in place, it left a week for ESD theoretically to check on the claim's legitimacy, and was a certain check on fraud. Once that was waived, claims would have been started to be paid more promptly. Right, the Employment Security Department says 70% of claims are paid within 10 days. So that could also have added to the problem. The software flaw was not fixed until May 14th. And a lot of the problem was evidently owing to a level of coordination with the software vendor, Fast Enterprises. Fast Enterprises supplies UI, unemployment insurance benefits, and tax systems to at least 4 or 5 other states. And they have been associated with other problems in the past. When it was launched, this is a massive IT system, was new to Washington State, launched in 2017, and had problems right from the beginning. But they were mostly having to do with the volume of claims handling, in addition to a lot of errors, which many people are still reporting on in this year, and will probably continue, because there's a lot of problems with the letters, with the notices going out to the wrong people, and so on. So those have been kind of chronic issues. The Fast Enterprises blamed ESD for not purchasing additional security to protect the system against fraud. Representative Kaiser in the state legislature, who is one of the leaders on labor and workplace issues, said that anti-fraud should be a core component in any unemployment insurance UI system, so that not having it would be somewhat similar to selling a car without brakes. So that is still waiting to be ironed out, and but anti-fraud continues to be an issue. Meanwhile, the ESD has hired new people. There's a new chief investigator in the Office of Special Investigations and Collections, and that office has also added a significant number of people. They've added 60 additional investigators and 89 support staffers in that office. This is according to Get Jesse. He also says that the number of tier 3 intake specialists, those are the people that everyone is really trying to get to, because usually their claim is so complicated it can't be handled by the people who first answer the phone. They handle complicated cases, and that number rose from 54 in March, is now 448 in September. So there is some additional staffing taking place. Meanwhile, I wanted to mention an issue that the Unemployment Law Project has been following closely, which is the lack of progress on getting appeals, that is, of denials. When people are denied benefits, they can file an appeal. Those have been very slow to get to the venue where they're supposed to be considered before a judge, that is the Office of Administrative Hearings. There have been tens of thousands of those appeals, some of them going back to March or April, that have not made it. However, in the last couple of weeks, we understand many of those missing appeals that have been sort of in a limbo state were actually redetermined by ESD to allow people benefits. So it's a little bit of a mystery how something like 40 or 50,000 denied claims were turned into allowed claims without going through a sort of a lengthy process, since they were initially denied. However, that is the word we're getting from ESD. So we're hoping people are seeing at least some evidence that their claims are being processed. There is some worry about the speed with which that happened, because it's a concern that maybe there was they allowed those claims perhaps too hastily, and that issues will re-arise later, and there may be overpayments, which is always a source of stress and anguish to claimants. There are still another 20,000 right now at the moment that are going to OAH or have already gone to OAH. So there are a significant number of claims going there, appeals going to OAH, but not as many as we would have expected. So more to come on that. And another issue that ULP has been working on that I wanted to mention in speaking of overpayments is Washington has one of the harshest policies in the country on overpayments. If you are found to have received money for a claim, whether or not it was because you made a mistake or submitted false information, or whether it was a mistake by the Employment Security Department, you are expected to repay that, and the policies are very strong on that. In addition, you will have to pay 12% a year in interest. That is the highest interest rate possible in the country, and there are other states that have that interest rate, but Washington is even more punitive, because if your payments on the overpayment are late, then you'll be charged additional interest. So that makes us officially the harshest state in the country. Also, Washington also has a very harsh policy on waivers. It's not under the law, if you in equity and good conscience, if there's financial hardship due to an overpayment, then the claimant can apply for a waiver and at least be considered, but their success rate is very low. Only about 3% of waivers are granted. And that contrasts with some other states like Vermont, for example, which grants more than 20% of waivers. Also, Washington does not allow any waiver for if there's a finding of misconduct in the case of a discharge, which is a very common situation, not for reasons that necessarily the claimant has been at fault for. It's just that might be the way it was determined. They cannot get a waiver. You can also not get a waiver if in some other circumstances. So our weighted waivers is very small. We are working on trying to get that fixed with some new legislation. And hopefully we can get the state to be a little bit more up to speed with standard procedures in other states. So that is the wrap up for today. And I'm now going to turn it over. John, I wanted to see if you had any additional comments you wanted to make. If you're there?
Yes, just on a couple points. One is
We are getting a lot of calls on the lost wages assistance because of their notices. There are some confusing notices that are hard to comprehend on it. Sometimes they'll send somebody a notice that says, you may be eligible if you fit these other conditions, and it's very hard to read. I just advise people not to panic about it, but to just, if it says you may be eligible, it means you may be eligible. It seems like a waste of paper and notice to send something out like that when they can make a decision. It would make more sense to make an actual thumbs up or thumbs down decision that could be appealed. So that's created a lot of confusion. And just one thing about shared work program, I think it's very similar to being on standby in the sense that it's something that the employer must be on board. I know I've had some calls from people who say, well, I want to be on shared work. Well, that might be true, but if your employer doesn't want to participate in the program, that won't happen. You can't, it's not a right or something that you can force your employer to participate in. If the employer makes a choice, rather than putting 5 employees on shared work, if the employer makes a choice to keep 3 employees and let two of them go, they can do that under most circumstances, depending on if there's a union contract or not. But those are things that we see. Also, we're still getting many calls about people waiting a long time for appeals. Again, my advice to people is to hang in there. If you want to contact your state senator and representatives about it, to let them know how long you've been waiting, and that might lead to further action. But it appears that this is a big problem, and I'm not sure how extensive it is. I know it's in the tens of thousands. It could be a lot more. It seemed to be perhaps their idea of holding on to claims under appeal so that they may fix some of them, but that has led to a lot of problems, because if things had been sent to the hearing office back in April or May, the claims would have been resolved by judges. Instead, they were put on an escalated path for resolution that was a lot slower than if they had a hearing. So it's something we'll keep our eyes on. If you know of people who are still waiting for hearings, again, it's good to check in periodically with the hearing office to see if it was received, but also to contact state senators and representatives. All right, thank you.
That's great advice, John. And to that note, in the chat box, I dropped the district finder to help you locate whom your state representatives are. And we have one question related to this, so I'll just read it and then redirect the participant. The question is, I sent direct secured messages and made phone calls and cannot get through to anyone. What should I do? I think John's advice on contacting your state legislators to help them, have them potentially intervene on your behalf is a great way to start. You can get that contact info in our chat box. Another question we have is, if I work part-time, does ESD take the earned wages off of my weekly benefit amount?
So yes, ESD will subtract a percentage of your benefit for every dollar that you bring in outside of the benefits you're receiving. So if you're, for example, if you're making $100 a week, in most cases, you would expect that about 75% of that would, your benefit would be reduced by 70 to 75%, roughly. There's a more complicated formula that's a little bit opaque, but that's the bottom line, basically, is there is an earnings deduction. If you look up earnings deduction on the website, you will find the chart and it will tell you how much of your income will take a hit.
One thing I would like to add a couple of things about that, because over the years people have asked, well, why should I work part-time or do a temporary job if it's only going to be taken from your unemployment? There is an advantage. First of all, it is not taken from your unemployment 100%, which Ann explained, but there are two other big advantages to working part-time or doing temp jobs. One, it stretches out your claim, so that money for those 26 weeks of your unemployment claim doesn't disappear. It gets added on. And if you're having trouble getting work, or if this recession drags on, those extra weeks at the end of your claim may come in very handy. Also, it allows you to connect with employers or keep connected to employers, which may lead back to full-time work. So there are advantages to be in the mix there. I think that the key thing about any kind of temp work or part-time work is that it's a mistake in most cases to simply quit the job and say, well, I'll just go back on unemployment full-time. That can lead to your claim being cut off. So if you are working a temp job, for example, or a part-time job, please get advice before quitting, because that could have harm, that could harm your claim.
Great, thanks, John. I did drop a link to the ESD earnings deduction chart into the chat, so please take a look at that. We have no questions in the, oh, one just popped up. Okay, just a note of gratitude from a participant. There are currently no questions. We will hang on for a couple more minutes. Please drop your questions. We would love to answer them online. You can also contact our office, reach out to us at our website, unemploymentlawproject.org. But we will be here available for the next few minutes.
While we are waiting for questions, I just want to say that it's important to keep these unemployment issues in the press. It seemed like after Operation 100% was completed this summer by Employment Security, which really wasn't 100%, it was 100% of a certain category. They seem to have declared victory and gone silent. There are no longer weekly press conferences from the head of Employment Security. And it was very encouraging to see the editorial in this Seattle Times recently about the unresolved claims, and these issues go on. So it's important for people to contact newspapers, whether they be big or small, or contact, local television stations, King 5 News, Cairo News. I saw a report on Como 4 News on Saturday about unemployment claim problems. So the issue goes on, and I think if you or people are still having problems, it's good to keep it in the mix. It may be political right now, where they don't want to put this out as a problem and try to put out that it's been resolved, but it has not been resolved. And calls to the Unemployment Law Project offices, both in our Seattle and our Spokane office, continue at a high rate of problems. And so even though Operation 100% is over, for example, that covered people between certain dates and certain categories. There are people with new claims I'm talking to in recent days who are having new claims and new problems that are the same as the old problems, which is I can't get through, I'm getting mixed messages, I get weird decisions, I can't, I send a message in the portal, I get no response. So they haven't really staffed up the way they should have. And I'm concerned that if this issue gets off the radar, that they will cut back on staff.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you, John. Okay, there's a question about whether we represent claimants during appeals, and if so, what are the costs?
Well, we are a nonprofit organization. We're funded by grants and donations. So there's no cost for representation, but if we take your case and we're successful, we would ask a donation. But if a donation can't be made, we would understand that, but there is no fee for services.
Great. We do have someone asking, how does Susie Levine still have the job as director for the complete failure and mismanagement of ESD?
So yeah, I can comment on that. Susan Levine is the commissioner, and she has done an adequate job, as far as I can tell, in a very, very extraordinary time. We have had the opportunity of seeing other commissioners in the past under far less stressful situations not be able to manage them at all, and handling problems that we thought should be very simple. Nothing to this level. So we have not asked for Susie Levine to resign. We would like to see the Employment Security Department get its act together. We would like to see it be better managed. We would like to see the governor respond with the kinds of resources that the department needs. But we don't think it can be boiled down to one individual. There's an IT system that's at fault, there's funding mechanisms at fault, and there's general management that does need to be addressed. John, did you want to comment on that?
Yeah, well, it's one of those things about substance over public relations. Yes, the department has failed. They failed to staff up. They failed to follow procedure and the law. There is now more than one court case against them. So there have been a lot of failures, as well as some success and benefits being processed. But having one person removed from a job can often be symbolic. That would not solve the problem. So whether it's the current commissioner or a replacement, problems need to be solved both in the short term and long term. In terms of why someone has a job, I recently saw that a commissioner from Wisconsin no longer has his job due to some claim problems there. It's the kind of thing where I think there is politics involved with the current commissioner, Washington State being a strong ally of the governor. I think there's certain loyalty there, but the big mystery to me now is that the current commissioner has gone silent. Just in the last month, there's been no press conferences, no news releases, and my biggest concern is that they've declared victory, and without solving the real problem. So maybe after the election, there'll be changes. We don't know. And also, if there's a new president who appoints Governor Inslee to a position, there may be a new governor, and that might lead to some changes at the time.
Thank you, John. There are no additional questions in the Q&A box. We will wrap up for this week, and we thank everyone for joining us. Please reach out to our office during the week if you need any assistance, and we will look forward to seeing you here next Monday at noon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.